Alright, Cousin Zach again. We're going to do a small sub-episode. Today we're going to talk about Duraspark distributors. A Duraspark distributor was used by Ford starting sometime in the early 70s and was continued usage up until the late 80s depending on the application. You'll know it's a Duraspark distributor if you have this plug. There were a couple different generations of Duraspark. They essentially all operate the same. You'll see a couple different cap configurations. This being on the hot rod, being an FE, it will have the dome style cap with this style plug. Later applications will have the familiar large cap with the HEI style terminals on the top. So we're not going to do a complete teardown and rebuild. In fact, I'm going to leave the distributor in the motor, but we're going to talk about basic operating principles, and I'm going to do a little explaining about some tuning that can be done with a Duraspark distributor. So I've removed the cap. I should hope you know what the cap is. Here we're looking at a rotor. I'll remove the rotor. So we will talk now about what we see here. We see a coil and we see what's called a reluctor. This being an 8-cylinder engine, there are 8 points on this reluctor. When each point passes by the coil, it induces a small current. Voltage, I mean both. I'm not an electrical genius, despite I'm an electrician for a living. But we'll notice there are 3 wires in the plug. One of these is actually broken. We'll have to replace this plug, it looks like, seeing as it just disintegrated for the video. How nice of it.
It seems as though you're tearing the hell out of my plug on my distributor.
We'll get you a new plug. This is just a chassis ground, this black wire. But it is still important. It's a ground reference. The important ones are, they're usually purple and orange. I'm just assuming this one's faded, giving the age. But those are the actual 2 wires on the coil itself. Okay. Now, there are a couple operations that can be done to a Duraspark distributor, and especially if you're working with a modified engine or you're working on a later computer-controlled engine, you're going to probably have to end up changing the timing characteristics of the distributor. There are 2 ways in which a Duraspark distributor typically changes timing. Granted, there's a couple variations. We have a vacuum canister. Most everyone's familiar with seeing this. When vacuum is applied to this, it pulls the arm in here and changes the relationship of the pickup coil in the housing, and then in turn changes the relationship of where the reluctor fires it, and this will advance the timing. So this distributor rotates in a clockwise fashion. So when the coil moves, or counterclockwise, forgive me, when the coil moves clockwise in the housing, the coil sees each fin of the reluctor sooner. Okay? This will in turn advance the timing when vacuum signal is applied. A small note on vacuum advance, it is my belief for almost all carbureted engines, there's exceptions to every rule, that they should be operated on full manifold vacuum. This is counterintuitive to what everyone tells us, and it has to do with emissions regulations. I'm talking for best economy and performance. So laws in your area may vary, but when you tune an engine to use manifold vacuum, you get advance at idle, which makes for a smooth idle, and then you do get some advance under cruise, which then brings in economy. So you get a cooler idling engine and smoother because you have advance at idle, and then you do pick up economy on the back side. Because let us remember, at cruise, when the throttle is partially cracked, your ported vacuum and your manifold vacuum are in fact the same. The really only difference between the operating characteristics of manifold and ported vacuum happen at idle. So, a small aside, but bear with me. So, what I'm going to look at doing now is I'm going to tear this part way down for you, and we can talk about the second way, and really the primary way, a Duraspark and most distributors change timing advance, and that's mechanically with a centrifugal system. So, usually this grommet will come out, and I'm not going to say always, but usually this grommet will oh yes, no, there's a screw you have to take out first that I almost always forget, and someone can make fun of me for later in edit. But when you take the screw out, the coil's gonna, the grommet's gonna come out. Look at that, so much nicer. Isn't it weird how that works? And what you need to do is you need to pop the vacuum arm off of the plate. And someone's been in here before, probably me, and has lost the little, you probably, I don't know if you could see where it would be. There would be a little E-clip here that's kind of important, and it's missing. That's not atypical to find. because you pop the arm off and you can now rotate the whole pickup assembly around and expose another screw. And that'll become important in a moment. But while I've got the arm unhooked, I'll go ahead and select the appropriate screwdriver here. And I'll go ahead and I'll remove the vacuum canister because I'm going to need to do that anyway. This distributor, it's hard to know with the age of this vehicle if this distributor is original or not, but it does have a calibration tag. Now, a lot of the manuals and books are lost that would tell you what this tag originally meant, but I can tell you, because this tag says D6TE, D stands in Ford language for 1970s, 6 stands for 76, T means truck. I don't remember what E means. But this does match up with what we know about the vehicle. This is a 1976 F100, but lovingly known as the Hot Rod. So this distributor very may well be original. I can English so good. So anyway, I'll continue with removal of the vacuum advance canister. These two screws go all the way through the body, so they're kind of ridiculously long, but it just comes off. This is replaceable. You can find this as a replacement part as opposed to buying a whole distributor. We have had issues in the family with a couple of reman distributors not being up to quality, poor quality casting, blasting media still in the bearings, causing failure, etc. I really recommend, if you're able, to rebuild your original Motorcraft, AC Delco, Mopar, whatever parts. It's oftentimes with a little bit of care and time, and of course you are going to spend about the same money and parts to rebuild it as you can just buy a reman, but you're going to end up with something that, at least if it breaks, you're responsible. So anyway, I'm going to set the vacuum canister off to the side, and then I'm going to remove the other screw we spoke about, which is over here. And the one screw I already removed for the grommet is one of the base plate retaining screws, and this one's the other. So with both base plate retaining screws out, you could just pop the base plate up if the reluctor and the coil weren't in the way. Now, I'll have to admit to you viewers, I've already cheated. I sprayed a little WD-40 on the reluctor, and I happen to know it's going to move, and you just go ahead and pop the reluctor up. Now, this reluctor, oh good, the screwdriver's magnetic, saved me the trouble of getting the magnet. You see this little tiny roll pin? This is very important, and it's also important to note that there is a groove in the distributor shaft and a groove in the reluctor, okay? And you'll notice these two are ever so slightly different. So
lower with that, there you go.
Okay, there's a groove in the reluctor on two sides, and they're ever so slightly different. So I want this to be the same as I took it out. So I'm just going to make a little scratch mark here and identify that this is the groove I was in. If it wasn't covered in WD-40 from someone cheating, you could like Sharpie it. This pin is very important and very easy to lose, especially when you're doing this in the vehicle, in the dark, out in the yard, which is typically when you're doing this, because the mechanism's froze up and the truck won't run. Not that I know anything about that. So I'm just going to leave that pin on that magnetic screwdriver and try not to lose it that way. So now this, the whole base plate will come off, and you'll notice that the pickup coil is bushed on the base plate, and this is supposed to pivot freely, and you'll notice it's a little sticky. This is a problem I've had with this distributor already when it was in the vehicle, and so I've already had this apart and cleaned it once. I did not have the materials with me to rebuild it at the time, and I certainly didn't have it sitting in a nice warm shop where there's refreshments. There's a little retaining ring or a pressed rolled edge, depending on how it's designed. Really, the best bet for this is just to spray it with penetrating oil and work it back and forth a whole bunch of times, and you'll get it loosened up again. This one's already looser from just me playing with it. The problem is the enemy, of course, of all of us is corrosion, and that's happening. But enough of that. I'll get that out of the way, and we'll talk about the meat and potatoes of the project here. So what you're looking at now is the mechanical advance assembly for a DuraSpark distributor. All right, and I don't know how well you can see, viewers. I'll try and clean it up, but you will notice there are some numbers stamped on here, and they do mean some different things. So how this works when it's functional is as the distributor speeds up, as it's spinning in the engine, as RPM increases, these weights are thrown out, okay, if they move. Now, this is a problem here. This is kind of why I'm taking it apart to show everyone, and so it can be R&R'd. The weights move out ideally. And you'll notice they move the shaft that the rotor button fits on in the counterclockwise direction. This does advance it in relation to the pickup coil. Okay? So that movement is limited by the length of this slot. Okay, the length of this slot is very important. And there's numbers here denoting the length of the slot. Now, there are some other resources dealing with Duraspark distributors that are available. But the knowledge I have gathered is that the number on the slot equates to half of the total mechanical advance of this change. Okay? Now, that's accounting that the bushing is intact, that's accounting the slot isn't worn, that's accounting for a lot of things. And the reason I break this really down to show you is if you have a later pollution-controlled vehicle that you are operating no longer in that state, legally, what they did, best I can tell, what Ford did on the pollution-controlled vehicles is they used a longer slot to get more mechanical advance because they were setting their base timing very retarded. So to get an acceptable level of total advance, they had to greatly increase the amount of mechanical. So this isn't set up too exaggeratedly. So you'll see this is a 13. That means this slot will gain you a total of 26 degrees of mechanical advance. If we have a base setting of 10 degrees, that gives us, or 8 degrees, that gives us 34 to 36 degrees of total advance. For a street engine like this, I mean, your mileage may vary. Don't take anything I say as biblical text, but 34 to 36 degrees of advance is plenty for most street engines. Now you start building an engine up, you start changing other factors, camshaft duration and displacement and whatnot. You may need more advance. But again, that's for you to determine. I'm not offering a tuning course. I'm showing you the mechanics of the device. So the slot limits the total amount of centrifugal advance. The springs and weights determine the rate at which that advance happens. The heavier the weight, the more advance you get early on, and the lighter the spring. And so if you'll notice, this distributor, which very well may be factory, has one lighter weight spring and one heavier weight spring. And they've done that to get the best balance. Where they were trying to get the mechanical advance to come in, there's charts for this. Companies such as Mr. Gasket and Holley offer recurve kits for Chevy and Ford and Mopar, AMC, etc. distributors. And there is other information available online. I will take this one step further. I will show you how to separate this part of the distributor shaft from the base shaft. And that's good to know for when this seizes onto the base shaft, which is what happened to me when I had this truck at home and this engine was in it. So you'll notice there's this lovely little piece of foam here. That's hiding a screw. Sorry, that's hiding a retaining collar. Some models it's a screw. I don't know if you can see. That's actually a little baby retaining collar in there. And if I remember right, there was a lot of foul language the last time I met this particular retainer because I need another small pick. Because of the manner in which it is installed. And let me tell you, it is quite fiendish. But otherwise, while I have this small pick, I can go ahead and I can undo the two springs. That will be part of what we're going to do here. Because if you notice the way this moves, the springs and that clip are what hold this upper part of the shaft down. And of course, since I'm on camera, I'm going to stab myself in the finger, and I'm going to have difficulty getting the spring off because I'm on camera. If I was off camera, I'd have this done by now. All right, well, we're going to go ahead and take the two picks, and we're going to try and separate this little retaining gizmo. It's an external snap ring of sorts that kind of has a upturned end on it so that it can be removed in such a fashion. I may have to just go ahead and remove the... Well, look at that. That spring just came right off. So it's the other spring that's causing me grief. Let's see, since I've got two picks now, if I can't just remove the other spring so nicely. Or not so nicely. Jake can take this out in the edit while I'm struggle bussing, if he's so kind. Or he'll leave it in there so he can make fun of me. Come on. I can't use foul language. I'm on the YouTube. There we go. Just took a little convincing. Fun part's getting them back on. All right, so now this is actually moving okay. It could be moving a little better, which is why I want to take this apart for cleaning. So if I can convince the retainer to separate, and I can convince this, there we go. Oh, and I lost the retainer. Excellent. I'm going to have to, oh, nope, there it is. All right, so I will show you the lovely little shape it is. And it's so easy to lose. As you notice, I just lost track of it briefly. And it rides in a ridge on the top of this shaft. Oh, look, I'm leaking from my experience earlier removing the spring. Anyway, so I'm going to place that up there. So this, as you notice, has suffered some corrosion issues and lack of lubrication and probably just generally moisture. This truck sat a fair bit through a couple of different owners. So what we're going to do now, and we won't film the whole thing, is we'll clean it and lubricate it. And at a later date, I'll come back and reassemble it. Or Jake can by looking at this video he wasn't watching as I did this and see if he can put it back together the way I took it apart.
It'll be kind of like a puzzle.
But I have left all the pieces. So anyway, we've covered basic operating principles, a little bit of tuning, which is all I really wanted to show you, and basically show you the general workings of a DuraSpark distributor so you're not in the dark or, and I hesitate to say, afraid of it. It's very a simple working procedure. The box that plugs into the distributor looks at, the signal it gets from the reluctor passing by, and it grounds the coil to fire the spark. It's really nothing more than a glorified transistor amplifier. It does have a couple nice features. The best boxes are the boxes, I wish I had one here, that have the blue or the black grommet. They had the best, more or less, timing curve in them and lack of retardation features, except for they do have a wire that comes off the fender solenoid that retards timing at start. And while it makes for a very smooth starting stock engine, it can get a lot more important if you have a stroked engine, let's say, where you have an engine that's hard on the starter. So having that feature is very nice, and it just makes your starter last a little longer. So I don't know why Jake has moved the camera. I don't know what he's planning to do in post at it. But I really don't have anything more on the distributor without showing you a DuraSpark box. Unless Jake has one somewhere. I don't know if that's... No, he's not. He's looking for refreshments. He's not looking for a DuraSpark box. So... you do need to... So I told you I had problems with this. You do need to do something about it. And it more or less can be done in the truck. But you see all the rust and everything down in there? Mm-hmm. That is because I had a heck of a time with this thing. And I mean, this one honestly may warrant replacement. This fit between this is awful chewed up and everything else. And probably the stem itself is not worth the hassle to try and rebuild. So you may have to purchase a remanufactured replacement or an aftermarket one. But even if you do purchase an aftermarket one or a remanufactured one, you definitely need to tear it apart and see what kind of mechanical advance it's giving you, and you need to match your application. Remanufacturers don't give rats behind about what they do when they put these things together. They throw bearings in them sometimes. Mostly they clean them up, make them look pretty, throw a new coil in them, and go. So there's no telling what slot lengths you will get and what springs you will get out of a remanufactured distributor. I got lucky with one. I purchased a, what's the company that just quit making reman parts? Cardone. I purchased a Cardone for my straight 6 1-ton and tore it down to see what I had, and one of the slot links was right. Not the one it was on, but the one of them was. And so I was able to mix and match some parts out of some other distributors to get the springs I wanted for the advance curve I was looking for. So anyway, knowledge is power, and hopefully I've armed you with a little. Maybe when it's back in the truck, we'll do a tuning video, and we can talk about how I tuned the Malibu halfway, and we can tune this halfway, and we'll call it shenanigans, Shade Tree Shenanigans. Rinse, repeat.
Shade Tree Shenanigans. Shenanigans.
That's all, folks.
Shenanigans, tuning, and dyno.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. The kind of dyno where you park it on a car trailer and tie the front end down and then do burnouts?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So the whole distributor situation, what'd you do to it?
I tore it apart all
Yeah.
the way. All the way, because I knew it needed it.
To the point that you and I had been talking about what it needed. So.
I just did it while you weren't watching, so now you're going to have to watch the video to see how I took it apart so you know how to put it back together.
Which is always a good time.
So obviously on the small blocks, the ports went straight horizontal. On the 351-400 modifieds and the big blocks, the ports are, different angles in between. The FE is the only one in recent memory, my recent memory, who knows how good that is, that has straight up vertical ports bolting, and that's problematic. Couple that with the fact that they
to be.
couple that with the fact they removed all this here in the casting process. If they had left this chunk solid, where that was actually a good, clean, blind hole, this would be a non-issue. There'd been more meat around it, but obviously this takes a lot of heat, and I'm assuming they did that as part of the casting process for weight reduction, etc. So,
yeah, Jed and I were talking about how it kind of blew our minds that all the bottom bolts gave no problem whatsoever.
no, because look how much meat they're into. They're
Yeah.
down in a good meaty part of the block, and they tend to get oil soaked. So that's less issue. But these almost on an FE almost always break off.
Yeah.
And like I said, my grandfather, one of my uncles, got a lot of beer money over a lot of years for guys bringing them heads to drill out and retap or helicoil or even weld or braze ears back onto.
Oh.
And then reflatten. And by flatten, I don't mean surface grind. I mean hand file.
Real old school.
Right. It's an old school motor. You got to remember, this motor went out of production shortly after this one was manufactured. As far as we can tell, this is a 1974 casting. I saw the casting number somewhere on the block, maybe on the other side. It's a D4TE block. This truck is a 76, purportedly. This motor, as far as we know, is a 76. So this would have been one of the last castings for this motor. This motor went out of production. Went out of usage sometimes between 76 and 77 and a half when the body style changed. The trucks were the last application for this. They went out of use in the cars in the early 70s due to emission requirements, tightening up. Really, they only held on in the trucks because they were over 8,500 pound GVW for the most part. So a lot of that let them slide. And they basically, Ford was running out the production run until they switched over wholeheartedly to the 351 400M modified, whatever you want to call them. A little more Cleveland-based type engine. And what's really ironic about that is Ford phased out the FE in favor of the M engines, whatever you want to call them, 351, 400M, Cleveland style, even though they're not truly the Cleveland, the 351C. The heads and everything were Cleveland style. Ford introduced those to replace the FE and to actually replace the 385 big block series, the 429 and the 460, because they felt the 429 and the 460 were too heavy. However, when they developed the 351M and the 400, they developed them with built-in emissions of the time. So they built in the air introduction, they built the AGR into the intake, they built in the cam timing reduction with the timing set, and that really limited them moving forward when the requirements changed for the EPA, and now they had to put air in different places. So putting air in where they were, this side of it, and the catalytic converter wasn't acceptable. Now you had to inject air in the head, and they had no place to do it. So the 385 series, everyone knows, turned into the 7 and 7.5 liter, lived on until 1997, and the 351 400M series that Ford developed, they brought them into production early 70s in the cars, maybe even 70 itself. No, 70 was still big blocks. So, early 70s in the cars, and they had to phase it out by the early 80s. The last model I'm aware of that took a 400M would have been a 1982 F-Series truck. And that was only the 3/4 ton and 1 tons. You couldn't get it in a half ton. by that point they were starting to think about fuel injection, which they brought in 2 years later. So the engine that replaced this was ultimately replaced by an engine it was also designed to replace. And of course the big blocks carried on until the Tritons took over after '97. Huzzah, we have a big block again as of this year. With the Godzilla coming to market, Ford has gone.
Is that the official name?
That is the official name. It is Godzilla.
The 7.3 Godzilla.
Yep, they're
gas
using.
engine.
Well, they're using 5.0 for the Coyote, and of course they're still using. I'm not sure how much of the Triton name they're still using amongst things, but they're retiring the V10, and they're not retiring the 6.2. They're still keeping it, even though it's got the whole 3 timing chain baloney on it. They are. Chevrolet has made pushrod engines all through. I don't know if that's a dirty word around here, but you've got a Malibu. The LS architecture has been king for the last 10 to 15 years because it was a power-dense, compact, lightweight power plant because it was still a pushrod engine.
Yeah.
And Ford finally got with the program and has now brought back a pushrod, long-stroke, tall-deck V8. And that, to me, that's the important part. Is the 7.3 liter Godzilla shares the stroke with my beloved 300 straight 6 of 3.98 inches. They finally brought back something with almost a 4-inch stroke. They haven't had that in some time. All the 3 timing chain motors went for higher RPM usage and gave up that nice long throw for all that low end torque. So they brought an engine to market that is a semi-skirted block, much like this engine. We'll talk about technology they've stolen from this. This is a pretty much fully skirted block. The crank center line is somewhere up here, and we've got this nice big chunk of skirt below that crank center line that offers a lot of rigidity through here. I believe they're doing 6-bolt mains in the Godzilla engine. Variable valve timing. I don't think they're doing any cylinder deactivation. There's, I'm not up to speed on all the information, so don't hold me to anything.
Right. Won't quote you on it.
Don't quote me on it, but definitely variable valve timing, 3.98-inch stroke, 7.3 liter displacement, pushrod engine. Nice big tall heads on it. They brought back something decent, and the guys, if you believe what you read on the internet. The guys that are actually putting them in tow haul rigs and daily driving rigs are reporting almost diesel levels of fuel economy. Because as you know, the diesel fuel economies have been tapering off slowly as they've been burdened with more and more emissions stuff.
Right.
So, we'll see. I don't own one. I probably won't. They're too expensive. But I can drool over the crate motor. That's only $8,500 shipped to your front door.
Only $8,500.
Only $8,500. That does not include the front end accessory drive or the control pack.
Oh my!
And they do not have numbers published for those yet. You have to call the tech line. So
it's alarming to me that you know.
Well, when you're wrong in the head. Anyway, do you want me to do a piece on this? Now that I've just given a whole spiel that you're recording and you can edit chunks of later.
Just do whatever you want.
All right.
As far as how to, because I'm also learning, so now I'm coming over there.
Oh, don't put that on me. I am not a good teacher. That's Kenton's job.
Well, yeah, even though you say that, I have never helicoiled a hole, so I'd like to see it be done.
Yeah, okay. No, that's Kenton's job. I T8 a little bit. Kenton's actually a teacher.
Ah.
Again, I make him sharpen my drill bits. I trade him beer. So, yes, Tucker?
Yeah, you do your thing. I'm going to see
See what's up with Tucker. I'm thinking about do's and don'ts and things I want to tell the viewers. And
Yeah, you don't have to say much if you don't want. You can say as much as you do want. What is wrong?
Well, the problem is, I'm a jabberbox, right? So that's the whole problem. And I told you, I've probably got the perfect number of beers in me to do this because I don't like cameras, but I do like engines. And so we're somewhere in the middle there.
So basically, just act like there's no camera there, work on the engine, and teach me how to helicoil a strip.
I'll wait till you get back from dealing with Tucker then. Custom spacers, yes. Custom wire looms, custom dipstick,
Custom everything, right?
custom everything.
Yeah, if you don't want to talk to the camera, just basically teach me how the
I
hell to
should.
do this, because
I-
I don't know what the hell I'm doing.
I should a little bit. I believe in Motorcraft oil filters. Yeah, that's,
That is one thing that, out of all my hackery and shitbox driving, on Fords, I like to run Motorcraft oil filters. On Chevys, I like to run AC Delco oil filters. That's one thing I've always stuck to. It's just kind of a weird thing.
I'll mix and match. I'll put a Motorcraft on a Chevy. I'll put an AC Delco on a Ford. Appropriate part numbers and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
But the belief I have in it is they have to design the filtration to hold up to honor the warranty. Okay. So, and I'll tell you, this is a piece you can put in, however you want to add it in. But I do not believe in the new Wix XP filters, and I will tell you why. Wix has developed those filters for extended protection, is what they're calling it. Okay? And that's because with synthetic oils, people are pushing cars to further and further change intervals. They're not changing the oil but every 10,000 miles. So the problem is your oil gets dirtier during that time, even with a new, modern, tight engine. There's still thermal breakdown, right? There's still usage, there's still moisture, there's still all of that. So what Wix is doing to make a filter last long enough for an extended oil change, and Wix isn't the only company, I'm picking on them because they're the one I found out about. Their XP line of oil filters actually have a larger micron size in the filter element. It passes larger particles than their traditional filters. And that is so the filter doesn't plug up through the extended change interval.
Right.
Okay? So, what that means for those of us that keep vehicles forever, I'm still driving something that's 2 years old. No, I got a 36 and a 32-year-old truck. We keep things a long time. That larger particle is something we've been preached against all this. It's change early, change often when in doubt, and especially when we do things like bounce around down dirt roads or gravel roads or tow heavy loads or flip something on its side. You try to take care of it for that. So I do not recommend any filter that says extended protection, extreme protection, any of those things, because it's a marketing ploy. What they're doing is they're making the filter last longer by making it a worse filter. So I'll take, for example, we maintain 3 3216 Caterpillar engines at work. They have 2 giant oil filters on them apiece. We change those oil filters every 750 hours. We only change the oil every 1,500 hours. Okay? And that's because the oil is good for 1,500 hours. We actually do laboratory samples on it. It's good for longer. We change it at 1,500 preventative, right? But the filters are only good for 750 hours. And that's honestly how I feel about some of these cars they're pushing 10,000 mile oil changes is that filter really good for 10,000? Or should you be changing the filter at 5,000? To be honest, I've frankly given up with all the tire rotations and everything that are necessary on modern vehicles. You just change the oil and rotate the tires at 5,000 and keep going. What are you spending? You already got the car up on the jack stands to rotate the tires, check the brakes, everything else you're supposed to do. You're buying oil and a filter to do it while you're already there.
Right.
Anyway.